What happens when a simple flight home turns into a public trial, when the color of your skin makes you a target, and the very air crackles with accusation? We've all felt that sting of being misjudged, that moment of powerlessness when the world seems to have already made up its mind about you. But this isn't just a story about prejudice. It's a story about what happens next. It's about a man who, in the face of public humiliation, held a secret so powerful it would not only clear his name, but bring an entire corporation to its knees. Prepare yourself, because the truth is always more shocking than the accusation. The hum of the JFK International Airport terminal was a familiar symphony to Dr. Dylan Brown. It was a chaotic orchestra of rolling luggage wheels, multilingual announcements over the PA system, and the distant roar of jet engines, a sound he usually associated with progress with connection. Today, however, it was just noise. He'd spent the last 4 days in a series of sterile boardrooms in Manhattan, navigating the tense final stages of a merger. He was a co-founder and the lead acoustic engineer for Ethel Sound, a boutique audio technology company that had, against all odds, carved out a niche for itself amongst the industry giants. The merger was the culmination of a decade of relentless work of sleepless nights spent soldering prototypes and obsessive days spent refining soundscapes. He was exhausted, but a deep, quiet satisfaction hummed beneath the fatigue. He found his gate in OSU 26 for Aura Airways Flight 227 to Los Angeles. It was a 6-hour flight, a perfect opportunity to decompress. He navigated through the throng of passengers, his tall, athletic frame moving with an easy grace. He was dressed in a simple, well-fitted charcoal grey travel blazer, dark jeans and comfortable leather sneakers, a uniform of understated quality that spoke of a man who valued comfort and function over flashy labels. In the pre-boarding area, he found a seat near a charging station and pulled out his prized possession, a pair of Ethel Sound Serenity Pro headphones. They were a pre-production model, the culmination of his life's work. The exterior was a sleek, matte black composite material he had personally helped develop, cool and smooth to the touch. They were noise-cancelling, of course, but their true innovation lay in the proprietary driver technology that produced a sound so rich, so layered, it felt less like listening and more like inhabiting the music. He slid them over his ears, and the cacophony of the terminal instantly dissolved into a perfect velvety silence. A faint smile touched his lips. This was his sanctuary. He selected a playlist of instrumental jazz, leaned his head back, and closed his eyes. The smooth saxophone notes began to wash over him, untangling the knots of stress from his mind. Boarding for first class was announced. Dylan remained seated, his ticket being for premium economy. He watched the parade of first-class passengers with detached interest. Among them was a man in his late 50s, with a florid, self-important face and a Brioni suit that looked a size too tight. The man, who would later be identified as Robert Peterson, was speaking loudly into his phone, barking orders about leveraging assets and crushing the competition. He gestured expansively, nearly knocking over a small child, offering only a cursory glare in response to the mother's gasp. He was the kind of man who took up more space than he physically occupied. Dylan watched him for a moment, a familiar sense of weary resignation settling over him. He'd met 1,000 Robert Petersons in his career, men who equated volume with value and saw the world as a ladder they had to climb by stepping on whomever was below. Soon his own boarding group was called. He gathered his things, slid his headphones around his neck, and joined the queue. As he stepped onto the jet bridge, the distinct smell of filtered air and jet fuel filled his nostrils. He found his seat, fortunatamente, an aisle seat in the premium economy cabin. It offered a few precious extra inches of legroom, a small luxury he always afforded himself, on cross-country flights. He stowed his roller bag in the overhead compartment and settled in. The window seat, 14A, was occupied by a young woman, probably a college student already engrossed in a textbook. The middle seat, 14B, was empty. Dylan hoped it would stay that way. No such luck. Just as the flight attendants were preparing to close the doors, Robert Peterson came striding down the aisle from the front of the plane, a look of thunder on his face. He was followed by a harried-looking flight attendant. "I'm sorry, sir," she was saying, "but we had to make a last-minute equipment change. The seat configuration in first class is different on this aircraft. This is the best we could do." "The best you could do is put me in glorified coach," Peterson boomed, his voice echoing in the now quiet cabin. "I paid for a lay-flat seat. My assistant booked a lay-flat seat." He glared at the empty middle seat, 14B, as if it had personally offended him. With a dramatic sigh, he began cramming his expensive leather briefcase into the overhead bin, grumbling loudly. He finally squeezed himself into the seat, his bulk spilling over the armrest into Dylan's space. He didn't make eye contact or offer a word of greeting. Dylan simply angled himself slightly toward the aisle, creating a sliver of distance. He had no desire for confrontation. He just wanted to get home. He put his headphones back on, queued up a podcast about theoretical physics, and closed his eyes, hoping to signal his unavailability for conversation. The pre-flight safety demonstration began. Dylan, a seasoned flyer, kept his eyes closed, but he could feel Peterson's restless energy beside him, the fidgeting, the heavy, annoyed sighs, the constant checking of his Rolex. As the plane began its taxi toward the runway, a flight attendant approached their row. She was a woman in her late 40s, with sharp features and hair pulled back into a severe bun. Her name tag read, Vivian. She leaned over Dylan to speak to Peterson. "Mr. Peterson, again. My sincerest apologies for the downgrade," she said, her voice a practiced blend of politeness and firmness. "Once we're in the air, I can offer you complimentary premium beverages and a full meal from the first-class menu as a gesture of goodwill." "A gesture?" Peterson scoffed, not bothering to lower his voice. "A gesture would have been finding me a proper seat. This is unacceptable." Vivian's smile tightened. "I understand your frustration, sir." She then glanced at Dylan, her eyes lingering for a beat on his headphones before moving on. It was a fleeting look, but Dylan, hyper-aware of such things from a lifetime of experience, registered it. It was a look of assessment, of categorization. The plane took off a powerful rumbling ascent into the clouds above New York City. Once they reached cruising altitude, the cabin settled into a routine rhythm. Drink service began. When Vivian reached their row, she gave a beaming smile to Peterson. "Mr. Peterson, what can I get for you from our first-class selection? A nice scotch, perhaps we have a Glenlivet 18. "Finally," Peterson grumbled. "Make it a double, no ice." She then turned to Dylan. Her smile vanished, replaced by a perfunctory, almost impatient expression. "And for you, just a water, please," Dylan said, pulling one side of his headphones off his ear. Vivian nodded curtly, retrieved the drinks and handed them over. As she gave Peterson his scotch, she leaned in conspiratorially. "If there's anything else you need to make your flight more comfortable, you just let me know, Robert." She used his first name. It was a small thing, an attempt to build rapport with the disgruntled high-value customer. But the contrast in her treatment of the two men sitting side by side was stark. Dylan wasn't offended. He was just tired. He'd seen this movie before. He knew all the lines. He sipped his water, placed his headphones back on, and retreated once more into his world of sound, oblivious to the storm that was gathering just inches away from him. An hour into the flight, Dylan decided to get some work done. He put his headphones around his neck, pulled his laptop from his backpack, and began reviewing schematics for their next-generation audio driver. The complex diagrams and equations were a comforting landscape for his mind. Beside him, Robert Peterson had finished his second double scotch and was becoming increasingly restless. He'd tried and failed to connect to the plane's spotty Wi-Fi, muttering curses under his breath. His gaze swept the cabin, and then it landed on the headphones resting on Dylan's collar. Dylan was too engrossed in his work to notice the prolonged stare. He felt a sharp poke in his ribs. He flinched, startled, and looked up from his screen. Peterson was leaning toward him, his face uncomfortably close, his breath thick with the smell of whiskey. "Nice headphones," Peterson said, his voice a low, accusatory drawl. "Where'd you get them?" The question was strangely aggressive. Dylan paused. "They're a prototype," he answered, simply hoping to end the conversation there. "A prototype." Peterson repeated, a sneer twisting his lips. He pointed a thick finger at them. "Funny. They look exactly like the ones that were stolen from my son's bag in the first-class lounge back at JFK." The cabin noise seemed to fade away. Dylan felt a cold knot form in his stomach. He looked at Peterson, really looked at him, and saw the absolute, unshakable certainty in the man's eyes. It wasn't a question. It was a verdict. "I can assure you," Dylan said, keeping his voice level and calm, "these are not stolen. They're mine." "Oh, really?" Peterson scoffed, his voice rising in volume. Passengers in the surrounding rows began to turn their heads. The young woman in the window seat nervously glanced over her textbook. "My son Kevin is a tech blogger. He gets sent pre-release models all the time. He was devastated. Brand new limited edition. And here you are with an identical pair." The logic was flimsy, circumstantial, but Peterson delivered it with the force of a battering ram. The implication was clear, hanging thick and ugly in the recycled air. A person like you couldn't possibly have these legitimately. "Sir," Dylan said, his patience wearing thin, "I don't know anything about your son or his headphones. These have been in my possession all day. You're mistaken." "I'm mistaken," Peterson boomed. "I don't think so." He unbuckled his seatbelt and stood, half-turning, to address the cabin. "This man stole a pair of high-end headphones, probably worth over $1,000. Panic and indignation rippled through the nearby seats. Murmurs started to spread. Dylan felt a hot flush of anger and humiliation creep up his neck. He was being tried and convicted at 35,000 feet. At that moment, Vivian, the flight attendant, bustled down the aisle, her face a mask of concern. "What seems to be the problem here, gentlemen?" "The problem," Peterson declared, pointing dramatically at Dylan, "is that this man has my son's stolen property. I want them back, and I want him dealt with." Vivian looked from Peterson's enraged face to Dylan's calm but tense expression. She looked at Peterson's expensive suit and his first-class grievance. She looked at Dylan, a black man, in a blazer sitting in premium economy. And in that instant, she made her choice. She turned her full attention to Dylan, her professional demeanor becoming cold and authoritative. "Sir, we have a serious accusation here. I need to see the headphones." It was not a request. It was an order. Dylan felt the eyes of a dozen passengers on him. He could feel the judgment, the suspicion. Every instinct screamed at him to fight back, to match Peterson's volume, to decry the blatant prejudice. But he knew that would only make him look guilty in their eyes. He had to play this smart. "There is no accusation to take seriously," Dylan stated, his voice dangerously quiet. "The gentleman is mistaken." "Well, we can clear this up very easily, can't we?" Vivian said, her tone syrupy and condescending. She held out her hand. "The headphones, please. Let's have a look." The sheer injustice of it was suffocating. He was being treated like a common thief, his word dismissed without a moment's hesitation. The humiliation was a physical thing, a weight pressing down on his chest. "I'm not going to hand over my property based on a baseless claim from a drunk passenger," Dillon said firmly. Vivian's eyes narrowed. "Sir, if you refuse to cooperate, I'll be forced to have the captain radio ahead. We can have law enforcement meet you at the gate in Los Angeles. I'm sure you don't want that." It was a threat, bald and ugly. Surrender the headphones or be treated as a criminal upon landing. Peterson smirked a triumphant, hateful little smile. He crossed his arms, leaning back, as if watching a show he had produced. Dillon looked at Vivian's implacable face. He saw the flicker of confirmation in her eyes, the self-satisfaction of someone who believed they were restoring order. He saw that she had already decided who he was. He took a slow, deep breath, letting it out carefully. The quiet fury inside him was beginning to solidify into something else, a cold, hard resolve. They wanted a show. They had no idea what kind of show they were about to get. He slowly, deliberately picked up the headphones from his lap. They felt heavy in his hands, not just with their physical weight, but with the weight of the moment. He held them out, not to Vivian, but so that everyone could see them. "You're right," Dillon said, his voice ringing with a new authority that cut through the cabin murmurs. "Let's clear this up." He looked directly at Vivian, then at Peterson, his gaze unwavering. "You want to know who these belong to?" he asked, his voice low, but carrying to every curious ear. "You want proof of ownership?" Vivian nodded, a smug look on her face. "That would be best." Dillon held the headphones up. The sleek, matte black surface was minimalist, almost featureless, except for one small detail. On the side of each ear cup, etched subtly into the composite material, was a logo, a stylized A, intertwined with a sound wave. "Check the logo." Dillon said, his voice like ice. The fury was gone, replaced by a chilling calm. "Then check it again." He paused, letting the silence stretch, letting every eye fixate on the small, elegant symbol. Then he delivered the blow. "That's the logo for Ethel Sound, my company." He paused again, letting the words land. "My name is Dr. Dillon Brown. I'm the co-founder and chief engineer. I didn't steal these headphones." He held Peterson's stunned gaze. "I invented them." A profound, absolute silence fell over the cabin. It was heavier and more complete than the noise-cancelling effect of the headphones themselves. The smug smirk evaporated from Robert Peterson's face, replaced by a slack-jawed, fish-like gape. His florid complexion paled to a pasty white. Vivian, the flight attendant, froze. Her hand, which had been outstretched and demanding, hung awkwardly in the air. Her mind scrambled to process what she had just heard. Inventor, co-founder. The words didn't compute with the narrative she had constructed in her head. The man she had pegged as a potential thief, the man she had threatened with law enforcement, was claiming to be the creator of the very object of dispute. The young woman in the window seat, who had been trying to shrink into the fuselage, now stared at Dillon with wide, astonished eyes. Her hand, slowly, almost unconsciously, went to her mouth. It was she who broke the silence. "Oh my God!" She whispered the words loud in the stillness. She fumbled for her phone. "Ethel Sound, I know them. You're that Dillon Brown. The one from the Wired article." Dillon gave her a small, weary nod. "The very same." The student, whose name was Chloe Davis, was a communications major and an avid tech follower. She had read that feature story a month ago. It was about disruptors in the audio industry, and Dillon Brown's journey from a PhD program at Stanford to founding a multi-million-dollar company was the centerpiece. Vivian's face, which had been pale, now flushed a deep, mottled red. The professional mask crumbled, revealing a flicker of raw panic. "Sir, I don't understand." "No," Dylan said, his voice devoid of warmth. "I don't suppose you do. You saw a situation and you made an assumption. You chose a side without a single shred of evidence beyond this man's belligerent sense of entitlement." He turned his cool gaze back to Peterson, who was now sweating profusely, despite the cabin's chill. "You said your son is a tech blogger, that he gets sent pre-release models. What's his name? What's his blog called?" Peterson stammered, his bravado utterly shattered. It's Kevin Peterson. Tech forward. Chloe Davis, her phone now unlocked, and her fingers flying across the screen, let out a small, incredulous laugh. "Tech forward, I follow them. Their big review of the Ethel Sound Serenity Pros dropped last week. They called them a masterpiece of acoustic engineering. They raved about them." She looked up from her phone, her eyes locking onto Peterson. The review was written by someone named Jessica Chen, not Kevin Peterson. In fact, I can't find any Kevin Peterson associated with that site at all. Every word was a nail in Peterson's coffin. The lie was unraveling, thread by thread in public in real time. "He's a freelancer," Peterson blurted out, desperation making his voice shrill. "He uses a different name for privacy." A likely story. A man from the row behind scoffed. He was a corporate lawyer on his way to a deposition, and he recognized the smell of a fabrication a mile away. The tide of opinion in the cabin had not just turned. It had become a tsunami. The suspicious glances that had been aimed at Dylan were now redirected with interest at Peterson and Vivian. The whispers were no longer about a potential thief, but about a liar and his prejudiced enabler. Dylan held up the headphones again. "These are not the Serenity Pros that were reviewed last week. Those are the production models. These," he said, tapping the matte surface, "are a pre-production V4 prototype. There are only 5 pairs like this in the world. One is in our lab in Palo Alto. One is with our manufacturing partner in Germany. One is with our CEO, Sarah Jenkins. One is locked in a safe in my office. And this last one," he said, letting the headphones rest in his lap, "is with me. The material on the ear cups is a carbon polymer composite that we're testing for durability. It hasn't even been announced yet." He delivered the information with the dispassionate precision of a scientist presenting a paper. It was irrefutable. It was definitive. It was devastating. Vivian finally found her voice, though it was shaky and weak. "Sir, please accept my apology. There's been a misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding," Dylan echoed, the first spark of real anger finally flashing in his eyes. "No. A misunderstanding is when you bring me coffee when I asked for tea. This was a public accusation of a felony. You threatened me. You sided with him." He gestured dismissively at the crumbling Peterson, without a moment's thought. "What part of that is a misunderstanding?" He stood up, his height commanding the space. He wasn't yelling, but his voice was filled with a resonant power that made everyone lean in. "Let me be very clear. This isn't about a pair of headphones anymore. This is about your conduct and the conduct of this airline. I want to speak to your purser. And I want to speak to the captain. Now." Vivian visibly flinched at his tone. The power dynamic had been inverted with breathtaking speed. She was no longer the authority figure controlling a situation. She was the source of a rapidly escalating crisis. "Of course, sir. Right away," she stammered, and practically fled up the aisle toward the front of the plane, her composure in tatters. Robert Peterson, meanwhile, seemed to shrink into his seat. He was no longer the master of the universe barking orders. He was a deflated balloon, the target of a dozen contemptuous stares. He fumbled with his seatbelt, a wild look in his eyes, as if contemplating a mad dash for the emergency exit. Dylan remained standing, a silent, imposing figure in the aisle. He had won. The accusation was dead, the lie exposed. But the bitter taste of the humiliation remained, and he knew with a certainty that chilled him to the bone that this was far from over. He could feel a subtle shift in the cabin. He saw the glint of more than one phone screen angled just so. Chloe Davis was not the only one recording. The whole ugly incident, the accusation, the threat, the stunning reveal was being documented. This private humiliation was about to become a very, very public spectacle. The few minutes Vivian was gone felt like an eternity. The cabin was a tableau of suspended animation. Robert Peterson sat hunched in his seat, his gaze fixed on the plastic tray table as if it held the secrets to his salvation. He was a man marooned on an island of his own making. Dylan remained standing, his posture, unwavering, his expression, a mask of cold fury. The other passengers exchanged hushed whispers and pointed looks, the story already solidifying into a legend that would be retold for years to come. Then two figures emerged from the front galley. One was Vivian, looking pale and thoroughly chastened. The other was a woman with a commanding presence that seemed to precede her down the aisle. She wore a crisp pilot's uniform, her silver hair cut in a short, no-nonsense style. On her jacket, 4 stripes indicated her rank captain. Her name tag read Eva Rostova. Her eyes, a sharp, intelligent blue, swept over the scene, assessing the players with an air of absolute authority. She stopped in front of Dylan, her gaze direct and professional. "Dr. Brown, I'm Captain Rostova. My flight attendant has given me a brief and frankly alarming summary of the situation. Please tell me exactly what happened from your perspective." She had bypassed Vivian and Peterson, entirely addressing Dylan directly and with respect. It was a clear signal. She was not there to mediate. She was there to ascertain the facts from the victim. Dylan recounted the events concisely and calmly. He detailed Peterson's initial belligerence, the baseless accusation, Vivian's immediate assumption of his guilt, and her threat to involve law enforcement. He didn't embellish or editorialize. The facts laid bare were damning enough. As he spoke, Captain Rostova listened without interruption, her expression growing sterner with each sentence. When he finished, she gave a single sharp nod. She then turned her steely gaze upon Vivian. "Vivian," she said, her voice low, but carrying the unmistakable ring of command. "Is what Dr. Brown described accurate? Did you threaten a passenger with law enforcement without any evidence beyond another passenger's claim?" Vivian's eyes darted nervously. "Captain, the other passenger was very insistent. I was just trying to de-escalate." "That's not what I asked." Captain Rostova cut in her voice like cracking ice. "Did you threaten him?" Vivian swallowed hard. "Yes, Captain." "Did you fail to follow protocol, which dictates that in a passenger dispute, your first action is to separate the parties and contact the purser or the flight deck, not to appoint yourself judge and jury?" "Yes, Captain." Captain Rostova's gaze was withering. "You will be on report for this. A full formal report. Go to the rear galley and stay there until I call for you. Do not interact with any more passengers." Vivian looked as if she'd been slapped. Without another word, she turned and scurried away, her humiliation now complete. The captain then shifted her focus to the sweating, miserable form of Robert Peterson. "Mr. Peterson," she began. Peterson looked up, a desperate, pleading look on his face. "Captain, it was a mistake, a terrible mistake. My son, I thought—" "Mr. Peterson," she interrupted, her voice leaving no room for excuses. "You have in the last hour been disruptive to my crew, harassed and slandered a fellow passenger, and invented a story that has caused a significant disturbance on this flight. This is a federal offense. Your behavior is completely unacceptable on my aircraft." She leaned in closer. "Here is what is going to happen. You are going to remain in this seat. You will not speak to Dr. Brown. You will not speak to anyone unless spoken to by a member of my crew. You will consume no more alcohol. When we land in Los Angeles, you will remain seated until everyone else has deplaned. You will then be escorted off this aircraft by airport security, who will take your statement. Am I making myself perfectly clear?" Peterson could only nod, his face ashen. The alpha male who had boarded the plane with such bluster was now utterly neutered. Finally, Captain Rostova turned back to Dylan. Her expression softened a hint of deep regret in her eyes. "Dr. Brown, on behalf of Aura Airways, and from me personally, I want to offer you my most profound and sincere apology. What happened to you was inexcusable. It should never have occurred. There is no excuse for the prejudice you faced or the unprofessionalism of my crew member." She paused. "I understand we have a seat available in first class. The seat you should have been offered first, if we're being honest. I would be honored if you would accept it for the remainder of the flight. We will, of course, be refunding your ticket in full and offering substantial compensation in the form of flight credits." Dylan looked at the defeated form of Peterson, then at the empty aisle in front of him, leading to the quiet sanctuary of the first-class cabin. The offer was tempting, but it felt insufficient. A seat upgrade and some credits couldn't erase the sting of the accusation. "Captain," he said respectfully, "I appreciate the offer, and I appreciate how you've handled this now, but with all due respect, I'm not moving." A flicker of surprise crossed the captain's face. "May I ask why?" Dylan looked directly at Peterson. "Because this man accused me of a crime in front of all these people. He needs to sit here for the next 4 hours and look at the man he slandered. Moving to first class feels like letting him off the hook. I want him to sit here and think about what he did. I want him to be uncomfortable. I want him to remember this." A murmur of approval went through the nearby rows. The lawyer behind him gave a quiet, "Hear, hear." Chloe Davis, the student, looked at Dylan with unabashed admiration. Captain Rostova considered his words for a long moment. Then she nodded slowly. "I understand," she said, "and I respect your decision. Please let me know if there is anything at all I can do for you. Anything." "Thank you, Captain," Dylan said. With a final disapproving glare at Peterson, Captain Rostova turned and walked back to the cockpit, her mission accomplished. The immediate crisis was over. The chain of command had been restored. Dylan finally sat down. He put his laptop away, the desire to work completely gone. He picked up his headphones, the Ethel Sound logo glinting in the cabin light. He didn't put them on. Instead, he just sat there in the quiet aftermath, acutely aware of Peterson's toxic presence beside him. The flight was only halfway over. It was going to be a very, very long 4 hours to Los Angeles. Chloe Davis could feel her heart pounding. Her fingers trembled slightly as she stopped the recording on her iPhone. She had it all. The arrogant accusation from Peterson, the flight attendant's biased intervention, the quiet, dignified fury of Dr. Brown, and the glorious cinematic moment where the victim turned the tables with a single devastating sentence. "I didn't steal these headphones. I invented them. It was pure, unadulterated drama." As a communications major with a focus on digital media, she knew exactly what she had. This wasn't just passenger footage. This was a cultural moment captured in 4K. It was a perfect, self-contained story about race class, privilege, and assumption. For the rest of the flight, an electric tension simmered in row 14. Peterson sat rigid, staring ahead, a man entombed in his own shame. Dylan sat in a state of controlled composure, occasionally sipping water brought to him by a new, almost reverentially polite flight attendant. The moment the plane's wheels touched down at LAX, Chloe's mind was racing. She knew the video needed to get out there, and fast. The story was too important to sit on her phone. As the plane taxied to the gate, she quickly edited the footage, trimming the beginning and end, adding captions to clarify the key moments. Passenger accuses black man of theft. Flight attendant threatens to call police. And the knockout punch, man reveals he is the inventor of the headphones. She added a short descriptive text. Unbelievable scene on my Aura Airways, Flight 227, from JFK to LAX. Man in suit, Robert Peterson, accuses Dr. Dylan Brown of stealing headphones. Flight attendant Vivian immediately sides with the accuser. Turns out Dr. Brown is the co-founder of Etched Sound and invented the headphones. Watch until the end. This is what privilege and prejudice look like at 35,000 feet. Aura Airways nightmare. Check the logo. Dylan Brown, Etched Sound. As soon as the plane parked at the gate and the fasten seatbelt sign pinged off, she hit post on her Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok accounts. She had a modest following, a few thousand people who followed her for college life content and tech reviews, but she had a feeling this would be different. As promised, Captain Rostova's voice came over the PA, instructing all passengers to remain seated, to allow a passenger to be escorted off the aircraft. 2 stoic Port Authority officers boarded the plane and walked directly to row 14. They flanked Robert Peterson, who stood up shakily, avoiding eye contact with everyone as he was led down the aisle in a walk of shame. A smattering of sarcastic applause broke out as he passed. Dylan finally allowed himself a deep, shuddering breath. He gathered his things and deplaned, nodding his thanks to the captain, who was waiting for him on the jet bridge with another senior airline representative. They handed him a card with a private number for Aura's executive customer relations team. By the time Dylan was in a car heading to his home in Santa Monica, his phone, which had been on airplane mode, reconnected to the network. It immediately began to vibrate, then buzz, then convulse, as if having a seizure. A tidal wave of notifications flooded his screen. Texts from friends, colleagues, his CEO, dozens of missed calls, and emails, hundreds of them. He opened Twitter. He was trending. Check the logo was the #1 trend in the United States. Chloe Davis's video was everywhere. It had been viewed hundreds of thousands of times already, and the number was climbing exponentially. It had been retweeted by celebrities, activists, and major news personalities. News outlets like CNN, the New York Times, and the BBC were already writing articles embedding her video. The court of public opinion was in session, and its verdict was swift and brutal. Aura Airways was being crucified online. Their social media pages were a relentless torrent of angry comments. People posted photos of themselves, cutting up their Aura loyalty cards. The hashtag #BoycottAura was gaining momentum. Robert Peterson was being digitally vivisected. Within an hour, internet sleuths had identified him as the CEO of Peterson & Co., consulting a high-end management consulting firm in New York. The firm's Yelp and Google review pages were bombed with 1-star ratings and comments referencing the video. His LinkedIn profile was being shared, his face now synonymous with arrogant prejudice. Vivian, the flight attendant, was being lambasted as the quintessential Karen, a symbol of biased authority. People were demanding her immediate termination, and Dylan Brown was being hailed as a hero. He was the calm, dignified genius who had faced down ignorance with brilliance. His company, Etched Sound, was suddenly the most talked-about audio brand in the world. Their website traffic had surged by over 10,000%, so much so that the servers were struggling to keep up. Pre-orders for the Serenity Pro headphones, the very model Peterson had falsely claimed were stolen, were exploding. They had sold more units in 3 hours than they had in the previous 3 months. Sitting in the back of the car, watching the digital firestorm unfold on his phone, Dylan felt a strange mix of vindication and deep unease. His private humiliation had become a global spectacle. He had wanted justice, but he hadn't anticipated this. This wasn't a contained resolution. It was an inferno, and it was burning brighter with every passing second. He had won the battle on the plain, but the war had just begun, and its front lines were now everywhere. For Vivian Mallory, the flight from LAX back to her home base in New York was the longest journey of her life. She had been dead-headed, back-flown as a passenger, not as crew, and was seated in a middle seat in the last row, next to the lavatories. It was the ultimate indignity. Every sympathetic glance or curious stare from her fellow crew members felt like a hot poker. Captain Rostova's report, she knew, would be scathing. When she landed, she was met by a union representative and a grim-faced HR manager from Aura Airways. She was immediately placed on unpaid administrative leave, pending a full investigation. "Don't talk to the media," they instructed her. "Don't post on social media. Don't leave your house if you can help it." The advice was useless. Her identity had already been pieced together online. Her name, Vivian Mallory, was circulating in the comment sections of the viral videos. A photo of her from her high school yearbook was unearthed and plastered across Twitter. Her quiet suburban life in New Jersey was shattered. The first few days were a blur of shame and fear. She unplugged her landline after the 20th call from a reporter. She deleted her Facebook profile after her wall was flooded with hateful messages and threats. She'd see her face on the evening news, a still frame from Chloe's video, her expression, a perfect portrait of condescending authority. The narrative was set. She was the racist flight attendant who had profiled a successful black man. Her employer, Aura Airways, fighting a PR catastrophe of epic proportions, needed a villain to sacrifice. A week after the incident, the full investigation concluded. Vivian received a termination letter via FedEx. The reason cited was gross violation of company policy failure to adhere to de-escalation protocols and conduct causing significant reputational damage to the airline. 22 years of service gone with the stroke of a pen. Her career was over. Desperate, she tried to find work with other airlines. But the viral video was a digital ghost that haunted her everywhere. As soon as a background check was run or a hiring manager typed her name into Google, her fate was sealed. The video of her challenging Dr. Brown was her scarlet letter. No airline would touch her. Months passed. Her savings dwindled. The pride she had once taken in her uniform was replaced by a gnawing bitterness. In her mind, she began to rewrite the story. She wasn't prejudiced. She was just doing her job. She was the victim here, a scapegoat for a mega-corporation trying to save its stock price. She had been stressed, overworked. Peterson had been so convincing, so loud. Dr. Brown had been so quiet, so aloof. She had made a split-second judgment call, the kind she had made 1,000 times before. This one had just blown up in her face. She never once considered the possibility that her judgment was flawed, that an unconscious bias had guided her actions. She never truly grappled with why she had so instantly believed the blustering white man in the suit over the calm black man in the blazer. To do so would be to admit a fault in herself, and Vivian Mallory's worldview had no room for such introspection. The hard karma for Vivian wasn't just the loss of her job. It was the slow, grinding erosion of her life, built on a foundation of denial. She ended up taking a job as a cashier at a discount grocery store, a position where she was invisible anonymous. She wore a bland, ill-fitting vest instead of a tailored uniform. She dealt with irritable customers over the price of milk instead of calming nervous flyers. One afternoon, a young couple came through her checkout line. The man was wearing a pair of sleek, matte black headphones. Vivian's breath caught in her throat. She recognized the logo instantly, the stylized A of Ethel Sound. "These are amazing," the young man was saying to his girlfriend. "Best sound I've ever heard. You know the story behind the guy who invented them, right?" Vivian's hands trembled as she scanned a carton of eggs. She stared at the barcode reader, unable to look up her face, burning with a shame she would never admit. The karma wasn't a single dramatic event. It was a life sentence of being a footnote in someone else's story of triumph, forever haunted by the logo of the man she had wronged. If Vivian Mallory's karma was a slow burn, Robert Peterson's was a raging inferno. For him, reputation was everything. His firm, Peterson & Constas Consulting, thrived on an image of aggressive, unimpeachable success. Their clients were Fortune 500 companies who paid exorbitant fees for his supposed Midas touch in corporate restructuring. That image was incinerated the moment Chloe Davis hit post. The initial fallout was brutal. Within 48 hours, 3 of his firm's largest clients had terminated their contracts, citing ethics clauses and the potential for negative brand association. The video was anathema to the carefully curated corporate images they projected. His firm's name had become a punchline in the business world. But the public shaming was only the beginning. The real, life-altering karma came from an unexpected direction. In Washington, D.C., an investigative journalist named Michael Chen, no relation to the tech reviewer, was working on a long-running, frustrating story about securities fraud. He was tracking a shadowy network of consultants who allegedly helped companies artificially inflate their stock value before major sales or mergers using complex, hard-to-trace accounting tricks. He had a list of suspects, but no concrete proof to link them together. One of the names on his list was Robert Peterson. Michael saw the Aura Airways video just like everyone else. He watched Peterson's arrogant performance, his blatant lies, and the pathetic crumbling of his bravado, and he thought, if a man is willing to lie so boldly and publicly about something so trivial, what would he be willing to lie about? When millions of dollars are on the line, it was the thread he needed. Peterson was now a public figure, a pariah. People who were once afraid of him might be more willing to talk. The video gave Michael the leverage he needed to re-energize his investigation. He started making calls not just to former employees of Peterson's firm, but to the junior accountants and analysts at the companies Peterson had consulted for. He found his whistleblower in a young, disgruntled analyst at a mid-cap manufacturing company that Peterson had restructured 2 years prior. The analyst had been fired after raising concerns about irregularities in their accounts receivable. He had been terrified of Peterson's legal threats, but now seeing Peterson so publicly humiliated, he felt emboldened. He contacted Michael Chen. He had proof, spreadsheets, hidden ledgers, and damning email chains. He showed Michael how Peterson's firm had systematically created phantom invoices and backdated sales reports to make the company appear far more profitable than it was just before it was acquired by a larger corporation. The acquiring corporation had been swindled out of nearly $90 million. Michael Chen's exposé, published on the front page of the Wall Street Journal a month later, was a bombshell. It didn't just mention the airplane incident. It used it as the opening anecdote, the perfect illustration of Robert Peterson's character. The story laid out the fraud scheme in meticulous detail, with the whistleblower's evidence as its backbone. The consequences were immediate and catastrophic. The Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC, launched a formal investigation. The Department of Justice followed suit, convening a grand jury. The company that had acquired the manufacturing firm filed a massive civil lawsuit against Peterson and his company. Robert Peterson's life imploded. He was forced to dissolve his firm. His assets were frozen. His business partners abandoned him, claiming they had been duped as well. The lie about his son, the fictional Kevin Peterson tech blogger, was revealed to be just the tip of a colossal iceberg of deceit. He had no son. He was a twice-divorced man, estranged from his only daughter. The headphones he claimed were his son's were likely just a pair he'd seen in an ad and coveted. The hard karma for Robert Peterson was not being shamed on a plane. It was the fact that his trivial prejudiced lie acted as the catalyst that exposed his entire life as a much larger, more criminal fraud. 6 months later, Robert Peterson, the man who had tried to ruin Dylan Brown over a pair of headphones, was indicted on multiple federal charges, including wire fraud, securities, fraud, and conspiracy. He was facing up to 20 years in a federal prison. His arrogance had not just cost him his reputation, it had cost him his freedom. While the lives of Vivian Mallory and Robert Peterson unraveled, Dylan Brown found himself navigating an entirely new reality. He was no longer just a successful engineer. He was a public figure, a symbol. He was inundated with interview requests, speaking invitations and partnership offers. Ethel Sound was now a household name, its sales having skyrocketed beyond their most optimistic projections. The merger he had been working on was finalized, but on terms far more favorable to his company, thanks to their newfound global brand recognition. Initially, Dylan resisted the spotlight. He was a private man, a creator who found solace in the clean logic of circuit boards and the purity of sound waves. He had not asked for this fame, which had been born from a moment of profound ugliness. But as he read the thousands of emails and messages that poured in, he began to see the bigger picture. People shared their own stories of prejudice, of being judged and dismissed based on their appearance. They told him his story had given them hope, that his calm, intelligent defiance had inspired them. He realized he had been given a platform, one that he had a responsibility to use. He hired a communications director to help him manage the deluge. He did one major interview, a long-form conversation with a respected journalist, where he laid out not only the events on the plane, but his thoughts on the insidious nature of unconscious bias in society and in the corporate world. The incident with the headphones was just a symptom, he said. The underlying disease is a failure of imagination, an inability to see people for who they are rather than who you assume them to be. Aura Airways, desperate to salvage its reputation, approached him with a settlement offer. Their lawyers initially proposed a standard package, a large sum of money, and a non-disclosure agreement. Dylan, guided by his own legal team, countered with a revolutionary proposal. He refused the NDA. The story needs to be told, he argued. He accepted a smaller monetary settlement for personal damages, but the bulk of his demand was institutional. He insisted that Aura Airways partner with him to create and fund a new foundation. It would be called the Brown Initiative for Equity in Tech and Travel. The foundation's mandate was twofold. First, it would provide scholarships and mentorship programs for underrepresented minority students pursuing degrees in STEM fields, particularly engineering and design. It would create a pipeline of diverse talent, ensuring the next generation of inventors and founders looked more like the world they lived in. Second, the foundation would develop and implement a new generation of corporate bias and de-escalation training not just for Aura Airways, but for any company that wanted it. It would use cutting-edge virtual reality scenarios and data-driven feedback to help employees recognize and confront their own unconscious biases. The training program would be called the Check the Logo curriculum. Aura Airways, facing a sustained boycott and a plummeting stock price, agreed to all his terms. They funded the initial endowment for the foundation with a multi-million-dollar commitment. The announcement of the partnership marked the turning point in their PR recovery. Dylan Brown didn't fade back into the quiet anonymity of his lab. He became the active chairman of the foundation, splitting his time between designing the future of sound at Ethel Sound and shaping a more equitable future for others. The incident on Flight 227 had changed him. It had forced him out of his comfortable sanctuary of silence and into the noisy, complicated and vital arena of public advocacy. His karma was not one of revenge, but of transformation. He had taken the ugliest moment of his life and used it as raw material to build something beautiful and lasting. The sound of change, he discovered, was far more resonant than any frequency he could ever engineer into a pair of headphones. He had faced down prejudice, and instead of just winning an argument, he had started a conversation that was changing the world. One scholarship, one training session, one mind at a time. In the end, this was never just a story about a pair of stolen headphones. It was a story about the masks we wear and the assumptions we make. The hard, swift hand of karma found both the flight attendant who chose prejudice over procedure and the executive whose life of deceit was unraveled by one arrogant lie. But the true power of this story isn't in their downfall, it's in Dr. Dylan Brown's rise. He didn't just want an apology, he demanded change. He didn't just clear his name, he used his platform to build a legacy, turning a moment of personal humiliation into a global movement for equity and opportunity. His story is a powerful reminder that while we can't always control how others see us, we can control how we respond, and sometimes the most powerful response is to build a better world. If this story resonated with you, if you believe in the power of truth and the importance of fighting prejudice, please help us share it. Hit that like button, share this video with your friends and family, and subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories that matter. Let us know in the comments, what did you take away from Dr. Brown's incredible journey? Thank you for listening.